Welcome back here on YouTube and LinkedIn, where we're back live with another exciting episode of the Top Innovator series. It's a pleasure to bring another guest to you who is also talking about leadership ideas, about game-changing strategies, and of course, everything that got him to the point where he is today. Let me introduce the guest for today. With us today is Bill Genovese. Bill is a partner at Kyndryl, a consulting organization, and he is also leading a quantum computing and consulting team. Before that, he held CTO and tech executive roles in several other organizations, including IBM, Huawei, and eHome Holdings. Bill, it's an absolute pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you for having me, Joseph.
Bill, I'd love to dive right into the topic of leadership and your leadership experience. You're super accomplished. And I would love to know, when you reflect on your own journey, what do you think are the secret ingredients to the success that you had? What are some of the factors that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a very critical question. And, immediately when I'm asked that, one thing always comes right to the forefront. And that's if anybody ever approaches, any level of individual in their career journey and offers you an opportunity to live and work outside your home country. Okay. And I'm not talking a couple of weeks or even potentially a couple of months, but I'm talking, a full-fledged international assignment where you relocate for a number of years. Besides the initial fear and trepidation and potential concern of where you may be going, I would say dive in with eyes open and full feet, because that's been probably the most pivotal contributor to my leadership experience, not doing it once, but in 6 different countries throughout my nearly 30-year career. Okay. And that's both taught me some very critical lessons in my development as a human being, but as a leader as well. Okay. And then, in terms of acceleration for career wise, what I brought out of each of those experiences and synthesized into my next role. Okay. And that's been a massive contributor. Yep.
There are a couple of things I hear in that. So awesome experience. First thing I hear is being willing to get uncomfortable. Right. Would that be fair to say that this was not the most comfortable move in some respects, that it took some... Say more about that. What did it take to make that step, to go to another country?
It was also a challenging of my assumptions and how I'm wired to think and react culturally, because the evolution and journey of that, took me to some wide-ranging dynamics in terms of culture. So what I mean by that is, prior to me taking my first international assignment, which was in Switzerland, I moved around the U.S. a number of times between the East Coast, the Northeast, the West Coast, and then the Mid-Atlantic. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the nuances there culturally between the East and West Coast, and even the Mid-Atlantic or South of the U.S., can be somewhat drastic, but not as drastic as you're going abroad.
Right.
Now, the move from the United States with all of those experiences to Switzerland is, like Switzerland, fairly neutral. Okay, it's a fairly open society, and it is reserved. Okay, but that was really my first foray into seeing, as a chameleon, what's working outside the U.S., going in as an American, what isn't. And as an example, I traveled over there with some colleagues. This is when I was with KPMG, and they were from the New York area, and this was their first time outside the United States. Okay. And you can tell, in the meetings, who was from the United States and New York specifically. And was observing very quietly reactions culturally through this experience. Mm-hmm. And I blended in more in the background, because even though I grew up in the New York tri-state area, I spent some time in California, and then the Mid-Atlantic and the South. And so I blended in. I didn't want to be, there's the American in the room. And that was kind of the first step in the journey. And then along the way, I embraced myself in the culture. I took Swiss German language, okay, to be more conversant in the meetings with the client and my Swiss colleagues. But then I moved around Europe on a number of other assignments to London, to Prague, the Czech Republic, okay, to Amsterdam, okay. There are nuances, as you know, Joseph, between the countries, but they're subtle. Okay, you're still in the European bloc, so there's nuances. And then the first, the evolution step that really hit me kind of like a lightning bolt was moving from Europe and then going to Singapore. Okay, which is Asia.
Totally different world again.
Totally different. And I kind of got blindsided because when you go to Singapore, it looks like Miami. Okay, I mean, you don't think you're in Asia. I mean, it's very modern, it's very digital. Okay, and I went in kind of with the bias and blinders on. Well, I've been successful across a number of countries in Europe and the United States. What's worked for me thus far, okay, which is my way, the Western way, which is tried and proven by standards in the West, is going to work in Asia. Biggest mistake in my career.
Big.
I learned by baptism by fire that I had to give others a chance to speak and listen to how they did things their way. Okay, so it was less about, I'm kind of paraphrasing a bit, but it was less about tried and true proven architectural standards and policies versus rapid growth and acceleration of just implementing, as an example, and executing. So it was a little bit of a balancing act. Okay, and even from a regulatory framework, in those countries in the ASEAN region, they're pretty progressive, and embracing tech faster than the West. So that was a leadership lesson there. Okay, and that resonated with me, and it evolved me as a leader for sure. Okay,
say a bit more, Bill. What was the lesson? What exactly could you take from that intercultural experience and bring to work or bring to leading people? Say a bit more about that.
It was probably a bit more of the balancing of the risk-reward ratio. Okay. I came from the West, and I've been going into Switzerland. Okay, I mean, heavily regulated country in terms of standards and what's allowed from a risk posture perspective, cybersecurity to application development to infrastructure and cloud consumption, to an environment that was less around that, but proven out in terms of leadership through adoption and proven implementation. So they may not have had all of the standards in place architecturally, didn't have robust enterprise architecture patterns, okay, but they were rapidly moving down convergence of industries and industry standards, e-commerce, okay, digital society, okay, and I had to kind of balance kind of what I've already grew up with in terms of a formatted roadmap or blueprint for architecture and delivery to, well, ease off that a little bit, Bill, and give your colleagues a chance to say what's been proven here in relation to that, okay, and adopt the approach. And that worked fairly well, okay, in that regard. So the other thing I learned there too was the whole concept around enterprise architecture, design authority, architectural patterns, really didn't exist in building a team. So individuals were kind of, in terms of their own skills, in silos, okay? Infrastructure server architect or application developer or storage architect. And they did not come out of their silos, but they were rapidly able to deliver based on their skills. So I kind of used a hybrid approach in the sense by using architectural enterprise patterns for integration, and I rotated individuals every 30 days. So if you were a DBA, well, next month you're going to be a storage architect. Okay. And so what that did from a leadership perspective, it instilled a little bit of what I learned in the West to balancing out what I saw in the East. And that rapidly helped me, instead of trying to force fit, this is how we build an architecture team with a reference architecture, okay, I was able to kind of use what was at my disposal with people and culture to rotate, and that helped out quite a bit. So yeah,
That's
interesting.
a very, very different contexts you've operated in. And I hear what you're saying about the different experience there. Now I'm curious. So when we are in such different cultures, we learn something about the different culture, what is being done different there. And sometimes it's an opportunity to learn about ourselves as well. What did you discover about yourself there, as yourself, as a person, as a leader, being in these different cultures?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to, instead of talking so much and trying to dictate based on your own personal experience what's worked well for you, okay, culturally, look around you and what's working well in terms of an additional pattern,
Hmm.
okay, that you can bring
Hmm.
into your tool bag or your toolkit and your methodology. And I thought that was very, very important. Okay, that
Yeah.
was kind of, and culturally, not only from a work environment or technology perspective, but as I said, my first impression coming to that country was I don't feel like I'm in Asia. I feel like I'm in Miami or
Yeah.
a warmer
Yeah.
city in the southern United States. It was so modern, and I was first time exposed to that, and I was shocked and very surprised. And I said, "There's something here that's working well,
Hmm.
okay, and I want to learn about that. Why
Hmm.
is it? Why have they accelerated so fast, and
Hmm.
what's working well for them?" And
Hmm.
really, the outcome of that question, in terms of an answer, was, well, you've got to balance risk reward a little bit. Don't get
Yeah.
so hung up on regulatory compliance
Yeah.
framework being a roadblock, okay, and open up your thinking to, I don't want to call them anti-patterns, for lack of a better word, that's what they are,
Hmm.
but there's additional patterns and schools of thought on how to do things and
Hmm.
deliver.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I'm curious what advice you've picked up on your journey from other people, right? We all have mentors, trusted
Yeah.
advisors, people we look up to, heroes. What was
You're,
some
you're
advice that you've received from them that stuck with you? Maybe even something where you first thought that's crazy or that makes no sense or
perfect. I mean, you're triggering my memory in so many areas in my career, and that goes
okay.
back to my experience in Switzerland. And there was a gentleman, he was a senior manager, and he was from Myanmar. Okay,
Hmm.
his ethnicity. So Myanmar is Burma. Very laid back gentleman, very seasoned, senior manager, actually director, and it rolled in between senior manager and partner. And when all of this, lack of a better term, chaos was going on with my colleagues from New York and the client and the Swiss colleagues, and culturally there was a little tension there, in terms of style. And I was questioning my decision to go over there, because as a new person into consulting, a senior consultant, and I'm over there and I'm like, do I belong here? Do I stay? Do I say, no, I've had enough? This is too crazy. Do I go back to the United States where I'm more comfortable? And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, Bill, I know this is a little chaotic for you, but remember what I'm going to tell you right now. Only you will know specifically when it's your time to leave a specific situation. Nobody else can tell you that.
Okay.
And you will know intrinsically, okay, something will tell you inside you've had enough, whether it's professional, personal,
Hmm.
all of the above, okay. Listen to that inner voice. That resonated with me and it stuck with
Hmm.
me throughout my career. Okay. And when I'm put in, Joseph, and put into situations, am I in a role or a company or a situation staying too long? Is there something
Yeah.
better on the other side?
Yeah.
Okay, I listened to those words you told me, and I think through it a bit more. Okay, and the compass is, I make the jump when I'm absolutely sure
Hmm.
it's time to make the
Yeah.
jump into the
Yeah.
situation.
Awesome
So
advice, right? The trust your instinct when you feel it's
yeah,
time to leave, because very often we stay in situations where we've known for a while we should really leave, but we stay on for
yeah,
whatever reason, and they turn out not to be such good reason. Yeah.
yeah.
Now you've talked about being in the different countries and learning a lot from that. How do you pass that on to next generations or to the people reporting to you? maybe even if they cannot be relocated to a different country, maybe that's not an opportunity. Is there a way to pass on the learning that you got from
Yeah.
that, or does it require the experience? Does it need
No,
the?
it doesn't, because kind of a lower level in terms of a breakdown of that thinking or that
Mm,
logic is look for adjacencies to grow and evolve as a human being and as a leader.
okay.
So if you're kind of stuck in a role, okay, and you're comfortable in it, okay, and you're very good at it, but you've kind of reached a frustrating point because you can't evolve beyond it. Okay, look for pivot points in terms of
Hmm.
alignment or convergence to adjacencies. Okay, and this goes back to that rotational approach I used in
Yep.
Singapore with my architects. Okay, and this is exactly what I'm doing in our company now with Quantum. Now, our company is an ex-IBM division, global technology
Hmm.
services and management that IBM spun out. We became Kyndryl, and you know, from a legacy perspective, we're doing the same body of work: technology services and management, managed services. And the difference is we have a large growing consult capability now around technology consulting. But we're not a software company. We're not a hardware company. We're a services company. So companies that are moving into quantum are not really services at this point. They're hardware or software.
Hmm.
Okay. But we have a number of adjacent pivot points: security and resiliency,
Hmm.
encryption, post quantum encryption. Okay. Well, vulnerability management is an adjacency. Okay. To move into quantum.
Yep.
Applications, data, and AI, our practice there. Okay.
Hmm.
The next step for AI is quantum, in terms of an evolution.
Yep. Yep.
So, same concept at a microcosm perspective
Yep.
individually, you know, look for places that you can move forward and develop as a leader outside your comfort
Yep.
zone. But, I'm not talking 360 degrees
No.
away,
No.
just as a next step adjacency.
Yeah.
Yep.
I really like this. The term adjacency. First, I wasn't quite sure what it meant, but it's great, right? Look for something that's a little bit different. Get a little bit uncomfortable. Make that pivot to something different. And the example of different
Without
countries
losing,
is a
yeah,
big
without
pivot,
losing,
right? That's a
yeah,
bigger one, but nonetheless.
yeah, without losing your core competency
Yep.
or
Yep.
who you are.
Yep.
Actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Now we talked about your past leadership experience. Let me ask you just one question about where you are at the moment, and then we'll wrap it up. It's not a question about company, not about titles, not about roles. It's again about your leadership journey. And I'd be curious to know, where do you see yourself at the moment in terms of what are your focus areas? What at the moment do you focus on to grow, to find your next level, to reach up to whatever is next for you, again, in your development, not title, not in terms of title or companies?
Yeah. No, I mean, the most important thing to me right now in terms of professional and personal life that resonates with what you said is authenticity. Okay.
Okay.
And if, at this point in my career, which has been long and accomplished, I think, to a certain degree and rewarding, if I can't be authentic, okay, then, you know, it's less important when you're younger. Okay.
Mm,
I think because you're being shaped and evolving as a human.
mm,
Okay. But, at this point, when you've seen and done a lot,
yeah.
okay. And I don't mean that in a bad way. In other words, I'm not saying that in the context of it's my way or the highway and what I've learned is the only way, but what I'm saying is you've got to be comfortable in your own skin.
Mm,
Okay. And you've got to be able to work in an environment and culture where you can be authentic,
mm,
where you can speak up, okay, or in situations where it's not appropriate to speak up, very well not to, okay, politically,
it's a
and
bit of wisdom there, right? Yeah.
it takes a mix of authenticity and experience to get to that
Mm,
stage, I think, okay,
yeah.
and the role that I'm in now in an emerging technology area on the quantum side allows for that, okay, but
Hmm.
it's also further evolution that's needed in the sense that everybody around you that doesn't know that space, can kind of challenge you. Not for the lack of, you get called an expert quite a bit, but it's, I don't know if you're telling the truth or not. because I don't know the area, so
Interesting. Yeah,
you,
yeah,
you've
yeah.
got, you've got to be comfortable with that and assimilate that trepidation from your
Yeah.
colleague and kind of play an educator and sympathizer but again, a core foundation of that is authenticity.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Very
So,
cool.
yep.
Bill, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. The idea of adjacency will stick to me, the idea of pivoting, and I love
Yep.
the narration of the different countries. Being from a different country myself, I mean, that totally resonated with me, as you can imagine, and it will be for many other people here. Thank you so much,
I've
Bill.
been to, I think, half a dozen cities in Germany. I've
Okay,
never lived there. The
okay,
closest was Zurich for over 2 years, but I mean, I've been to Cologne, Frankfurt, Berlin, Dresden. I think my favorite was probably Hamburg, the Christmas
okay,
market.
okay. They're all a bit further north. I'm from Munich and lived a long time in Stuttgart
Munich
as
as
well.
well. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm a, former two-time Porsche owner and VW owner as well. So,
Awesome. Bill, thank you
yeah,
so much. For everyone
thank
else
you.
out there, thank you for joining us today. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. And most importantly, join us again when we're here again on the Top Innovator series. And until then, make sure to keep your brain cells active.